If I could go back in time, I don't know if I would have ever gotten an Apple.
No, like I said, you get a normal laptop, would you put Apple's operating system on it?
Once I got hooked into it, I'm in. You know, you get an Apple computer, and then you get an Apple phone, and then you get an iPod, and then all of a sudden you're just like, well, can't change now.
Have the best of both worlds.
And then they jack the price up on you, and you're sunk.
It's all marketing.
What? It's true. My first laptop was $300. It was awesome.
Yeah, but with Mac you get all the software on it. That's one of the perks of it.
Looks like for him, the live stream's awesome.
Live stream's ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hang on. Maybe just start with him, get people saying.
382 is what you wanted?
I thought it was 218 you wanted.
Oh, what was it? 218? Okay. I will start with my best singing voice. 218. Okay, here we go. When he cometh to make up his jewels, all his jewels, precious jewels, his loved and his own. Like the stars of the morning, his bright crown adorning, they shall shine in their beauty, bright gems for his crown. He will gather the gems for his kingdom, all the pure ones, all the bright ones, his loved and his own. Like the stars of the morning, his bright crown adorning, they shall shine in their beauty, bright gems for his crown.
Was that it?
There's one more verse, so I'll take it, please.
Little children, you love their Redeemer. All the jewels, precious jewels, his loved and his own. Like the stars of the morning, his bright crown adorning, they shall shine in their beauty, bright gems for his crown.
You could zoom in visually.
Why won't it, there we go.
Oh, was just singing one hymn, or?
Let's see another one.
Victoria wants to know.
I just wanted to know because I want to log off the internet once.
Yeah.
I'm on the screen. If I was a little more. You got the entire whiteboard in it? Looks like you cut off the. Okay. This is us. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final class of today. September. Testing.
Yeah.
Let's open the word prayer. Amen. Okay, so we have been looking at methodology because the premise of our study has been the idea that
Hold on. I'm running out of minutes. Let me just switch it to the camera memory for a second.
I hear Trevor's voice.
Hello.
hello, Annabelle.
Sorry, what's that? Yeah. Got me distracted with chores and forgot about this.
Thank you, Edward.
I'm trying to figure out where to switch it from memory disk to the.
There we go. Everything.
Brother Harry's gone to pick up Terry, and Tiffany had some business to attend to, so she'll be back later today.
I just switched it off because it was bugging me. Okay, I just switched it off. You can just switch it off. There's no button.
Recording on Zoom. Yeah. Sorry.
All right.
Okay. So we began with the study on methodology, and the idea was that in this time of preparation, we need to come to grips with not only come to know the make of the vehicle, if we use that allegory, you know, the make and model, but to open the hood and to come to understand how that vehicle operates, right? And how this message operates, that falls under the rubric of methodology. So System has been going through parable teaching, and I've begun my study with the consideration of the subject of fractals, right, which is a very important concept with regards to how we understand the models that we take as present truth, the models that instruct us as to what is and what is coming, right? So we began by laying out the concept of a fractal. What is it? A fractal is a sequence that repeats within itself at different scales, a pattern within a pattern, basically. If we're going to elaborate upon that, we say it's a sequence, which is a pattern that repeats itself within itself at different scales, right? So we gave the illustration of a macro line or a parent line that lays out the sequence. And as you break down that line to its constituent parts, you see another line which bears the same sequence. And as you break down that line into its constituent parts, you see another line which repeats the sequence of the macro line, or what we can refer to as a parent line, right? We went through the history of the movement and laid out how this concept of fractals developed, how it was introduced into our understanding, right? We identified that prior to Ezra 7:9, our reform line did not bring to view any waymarks between 9/11 and the Sunday law. It was 1989, 9/11, Sunday law, closing probation, and second coming. And what Ezra 7:9 introduced was this waymark of what we refer to then as the midnight cry between 9/11 and the Sunday law. And this waymark divided the history of the church, right? From 9/11 to the Sunday law, it divided it into two parts. And from Ezra 7 itself, we derive this language of priests and Levites and Nethinim also. And 2 Chronicles 29 shows that there's an order to the testing or the history of these three groups. The priests are cleansed, purified first, followed by the Levites, and then the Nethinim, according to 2 Chronicles 29. We also spoke about how Millerite history fed into the identification of this waymark and the two phases that is separates between 9/11, the midnight cry, and midnight cry to the Sunday law. The first day of the first month, the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month, as representing 9/11, midnight cry, and the Sunday law. Right, so we gave that overview, and we began to ask the question here, the question which was, when we identify fractals, when we speak of the concept of a fractal, if we want to identify fractals, where do we begin? What's our starting point?
The macro level.
Yes, the macro level, or the parent line, a template, or we could say a line of progression. And what is this? It's basically the model or the line as it is given in God's word, right? In its original intent. When we read the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy, it gives us this macro level line of Adventism from 1798, 1844, Sunday law, close of probation, second coming. This is the macro line of the line of progression, the waymarks that you're given directly by the scriptures themselves in their plainest reading, if that makes sense, right? But from this macro line, it becomes a template. You know, what's a template?
An example.
An example. It becomes, or an outline, right? It becomes an outline for the fractals that we derive from it, right? So, what fractals do we derive from this line of Adventism?
Ancient history and modern history. I mean, ancient Israel, modern Israel, or if we're looking at, Millerites or
Because this is the macro line of Adventism. So it's Millerite history, the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and our time period, the end. And we see this template, we see this pattern reproduced in Millerite history, just as we see it reproduced here in the line of 144,000. What does it look like in Millerite history? We see 5 waymarks here. What are the 5 waymarks in Millerite history? What are the 5 waymarks in our line that are following the pattern of this template? We saw Rabat Millerite here. What other waymarks?
1798,
1798.
and we will have April 19th.
1840.
Yeah, if you're just doing 5, it'll be 1840.
Mm,
1840.
Then the 19th of April.
no,
Are you sure?
because it's only 5. It depends when you want to finish your line. If you finish your line at the second advance will be 1863 for them. Then if you go backwards, close of probation will be October 22nd. Sunday law will be what we call the midway. The midway will be July 21. And the second angel will be April 19th.
So put April 19th.
Yeah, otherwise it's another line. That's what I was trying to say.
Otherwise,
It will be another
Macro.
macro, yeah. Another micro,
Macro.
fractal. I don't know. Is it?
I thought that's what he was doing. I thought he was doing a fractal.
well, this is Millerite history, the entire Millerite history from the time of the end to 1863, right? And we see using this line as a template or a pattern. So I mean, you can work backwards, right? You have the time of the end, the time of the end. You have the second coming, which marks the end of this line. Where does the Millerite line end? 1863, right? You have the close of probation, which is a shut door. October 22nd, October 1844, you see a shut door, right? The Sunday law, July is I guess midway, right? The middle point in this line of progression. The Sunday law is the same in this macro level line. 1844, paralleling April 19, 1844, essentially working backwards. but you can draw parallels between the waymarks in terms of the characteristics that you see fulfilled.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm not used to this line because I'm so used to doing the Millerite line the traditional way that it's, ending in 1844. I never do 1863, but I wasn't sure what to put for the second waymark there.
Over here,
Um,
how would you conceptualize using the line of progression as a template? And if we're drawing a fractal from the macro level line, how would you conceptualize the Millerite line?
I think like that, yeah. I would put a line for somebody midway. I think logic was good.
So it makes sense.
It makes sense. I'm just struggling that we didn't put 1840 or the Midnight Cry on there. So, because they're two major waymarks.
Yeah, like
Yeah, but that's the-
why? What makes you choose those over other ones? You know what I mean? Like, say you decided, well, what makes you choose July over August, or what makes you choose April over 1840, or you know what I mean?
I can understand the logic for July 21st, because we know that's midway, midpoint, and Sunday law. So that is just a given right there. 1860, oh, sorry.
Like, is it like on our big line?
On a fractal level, and even on I think looking at Elder Tess's lines, I mean, we always point that out as, the middle, that midway, that midpoint the way to remember it is that one lining up as a Sunday law. And that was in Millerite history, July 21st was that midpoint, midway, and that marked it. And that's what marked the Sunday law there. And that's
So-
kind of in my head. So I don't know how to kind of break it down, but that's kind of the logic that's going through my mind.
How do we? Because we're working off the big one,
Yeah.
and so the Sunday law. I mean, it's the third of the five or whatever that you've chosen. Is there a
Okay.
reason that we say that's connected with midway?
Let's work through it. Do you see the connection 1798, 1798?
Yes.
What time date? Do you see the connection, the end of the line with the second coming with 1863?
No, I've never really. I mean, I kind of get it, but I couldn't really tell you.
Can someone explain that?
Oh,
Let's
go
just
ahead.
make that. Well, Katya,
You want to go? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, you.
Go ahead.
No, you. I was gonna say, because we know that Christ has come back during that history, but they strayed. And it was at 1863 that he was supposedly to come back during that time, but because they went astray, then it prolonged time. They went scattered, and then God had to regather his people. So that would have been the time he would have come back again, the year. He would have
Or
come back.
1888.
No,
No.
1863.
1863.
You know what I mean? Like, what's making you choose that one?
Okay.
Why 1863?
Katya?
Okay, you have the chiastic structure of the 2520, and one of them, finish in 1863, and we are in the gathering period. So the gathering period ends there. If you do the chiastic structure, so you know that
Because
the end of the line
that's
is
the end of the gathering.
Yes, that's the end of the gathering. So automatically, if they have taken the time to go back or to what happened properly to 1844, they would have been able to find the date for 1863. So
we connect characteristics. I'm going to repeat what you just said.
Yeah.
So you see the parallels between here, time of the end, the beginning of a line, the beginning of a line. Second coming, Christ comes, and he's coming at the end of what? Of a gathering process, right? 63, Christ could have come in 63, because 63 marks the end of Millerite history. Those lines of that's shown in those studies of when you look at test covers then the line of slavery, right? That, you know, there are lines of, that Christ could have come 3 times in Adventist history. He could have come in 63, right? And the test that they were going to face then, that they were facing then was slavery.
Mhm.
And based on that test, people were making decisions that they would have been judged upon, that, you know, would have left them on one of the 2 sides when Christ came in that history, 1863 time. And the second time it could have come was 1888, right? 1888 is clear, right? 63, we arrive at that date based on, you know, the chiasm presented by the 2520. The 2520 begins with the scattering process, right? And it ends with the harvest. And the entire 2520 itself ends in 1863. So that then is used as evidence, right? To locate that when Christ could have come in the history of slavery, 63 is the date we locate for that, because that's when the 2520 came to its terminus, its conclusion, right? So we have Christ coming here. Christ could have come here, but it's a line of failure, but it parallels the second coming. And you have here, this is essentially the gathering of Adventism from October 22nd, 1844 to 1863. So Christ is coming at the end of a gathering process, right? This time period would have been the harvest of the world. Would have been had they, based on the test in this time period, based on the test of slavery, people were being gathered into 2 classes for Christ to have come in 1860. But of course, we know it's a line of failure.
So when he does they were scattered up until 1798, right?
Yes.
They were gathered up until 1844, right?
They were gathered up until 1844.
But the thing is that when you look at the chiastic structure.
And then they were
Yeah.
scattered again,
Oh.
right? And they're gathered again. Yeah,
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah,
you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's referring to the line, she did that with the line of the counterfeit, you know, when she was comparing the scattering and the gathering. Yeah. And so after 1844, they go back to the scattering until 1850, you know, when
Yeah.
the chart is produced, you know, and that brings back, you know, to the gathering until 1863. However, you have to use the line of the 2520.
Yeah.
You know, and
this is a different model.
yeah, this is a different model.
So this is the thing, and this is something that we're going to bring up, which is that when we are, and this is an important point to juncture to make this point, which is how do we approach these models, right? We were not to combine models,
Right.
right? Let's give an example. We have.
Can you put the other model I just talked about on there? Are you prepared for that one?
No, I don't have it top of mind. I know what you're talking about. I've seen the stuff. I just don't have all the. Okay, that's what's talking about. But let's take one model, the model of Matthew 13, because we're going to look at that. This is wheat and tares. Let's take another model. The model of this one here, line of 144,000. So you have model 1 and you have model 2. What's the best way to lay this out? You want to identify what each of these models is teaching about our line. So this is our line. We'll say, I'll put here our line. You want to identify what each of these models is teaching about our line. How do you approach it? You study this model. You study this model, identify all its specifications, understand it in all its detail, right? And then you take the information that this model is providing us. You take all the information that this model opens up to us, and you bring it down to our line. I think I found a better way to frame this. Right, you take all this model, you take all the information this model provides, and you bring it down to our line. You have another model, the line of 144,000. You take all the information that this model provides and bring it down to our line. What you, and this is correct. What you don't do is combine information from two models, right? Do this here. This is what you don't do. Is combine information from two models and using essentially mixing information from two models to identify what is taking place in our line. I'm going to rephrase that to try to make it more clear. What we need to do is to look at Matthew, the model of Matthew 13, identify what it is teaching us, not add anything to it, and simply bring that information to our line. And when we're looking at a different model, we're not looking at it combining any of the thoughts and concepts from this model. We're looking at it on its own, as if there were no other line. And we look at everything that it is teaching, right? And identify all its specifications and then bring those to our line, right? We're not to combine two different models as what you're doing. Ellen White Test laid out a model, right, for the line of the counterfeit. That's one model, and it's teaching specific lessons. We're looking at a different model, which is, I guess, just the line of Millerite history from the perspective of the 2520. These are two different models. They're teaching different things. So they may look different because they're emphasizing different things. So we just look at each one, identify what it is teaching on its own merits, and not insist that Tess's line of the counterfeit match up in all its details with what this line, which is a different model, is presenting. Now, I've said that, but we're going to go through a specific example. God willing, forget that, right? So verbally, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, we're going to go through an example. I think even shortly.
Verbally, it makes sense. It's just when you get into using these different models, you're using different waymarks, and how do you decide which waymarks to use at which time, and where to start the line at which time, and cut the line at which time? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well,
it changes a lot of stuff.
Again, you're guided. You have a parent line. What is the parent line teaching? Understand all its specifications, right? Now, when you have the fractal, there must be correspondence between the characteristics of the waymarks in the parent line with the fractal that you're identifying, right? So we're not just whipping out 1863 from nowhere. There's correspondence between the characteristics of the second coming and 1863 that we can identify, yes? We're not just whipping out close of probation as paralleling 1844 from nowhere.
No,
They're characteristics we can identify that correspond, right? So it's not guesswork. When you understand this history, you are equipped to identify the connections, right, in the fractal line based on the characteristics of the waymarks. That makes sense. So the correspondence of those characteristics is what determines which waymark we are picking. Right? We can't put we can't put 1888 here. Right? Because the characteristics don't fit.
Well, okay, what would you say about so there's no 2520 correspondence end of gathering time in 1888, is that what you're saying?
Fair enough, Christ could have come in 1888, right? So maybe that's not the best example, but still, here we have a shut door and a gathering process. Do we see that before 1880? That 1880 is preceded by a shut door and a gathering process. We don't see that with 18.
You'd have to just skip it. You just have to skip 1863 and put 1888.
Yeah.
So it's, if you could do it, maybe. I don't like. This is just the details that I'm
because the
trying
gathering process of who? Right, because there's no gathering in 1888, right? So here, if there's a gathering process, it's the gathering process of the people you can identify through this history, right?
Okay.
So here, if you're going to insist on putting 1888, who is being gathered in 1888? 1863, you can identify who's being gathered. It's the
end of the gathering, 1860.
It's the end of the gathering process.
Sure.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm just saying, starts. Come on, hurry, like.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes,
It takes some thought,
yeah.
but it's not pulling stuff out of nowhere. You have to identify the corresponding characteristics.
So now you say, like, with the, how there's two gatherings or whatever, how do you decide? I mean, that's
What two gatherings are you identifying?
when the spirit prophecy says we're being gathered a second time. You know what I mean?
What are you referring to there? What are you saying is that second gathering?
The period, some point between after 1844, after the disappointment, when they're scattered, and then they're gathered again. You know what I mean?
I think she's writing that. Are you asking when that starts, the gathering?
Yeah, she says
In
that
1850.
1850. Yeah, referring
Yeah,
to
they're writing 74.
Yeah, I think so.
When she says that they put in the fourth hand.
Yeah.
Gather a second time.
how do you deal with that?
Oh,
And that's why the line doesn't finish actually before 1863, because they go in scattering and then they go back into gathering.
Yeah.
So the gathering has to be really ending, for the line to end as well. So that's why it's okay. It's still within the line. Just imagine that you have fractals in between. I mean fractals. You have waymarks, in between 1844 and 1863. So your 1850 is there. It's fine.
Okay.
and you're saying they're scattered 1844 to 50 and they're gathered from 50 to 63.
Yeah.
But because they rebel in that process, they go into a legacy condition.
Yeah.
The gathering isn't completed
Mhm.
because it doesn't come in 63. That's how I understood. Is that correct?
Oh, that's good.
And then they go into the scattering at 63.
Yeah.
Because they
Until
reject. the
It's weird
25.
because they go to Laodicea in 1850, right when they're getting gathered. I've always wondered about that.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd have to think about that. What I see is that model of that line where we're identifying those details that here there's a scattering. I'm trying to clarify what model it is.
Right, that's kind of what I'm asking, what you're saying. It's in the spirit of prophecy.
Yeah.
It's not talking about a particular, you know what I mean? It's just there. So when do you apply it? When do you don't? Or how does that work?
I'll say this, understanding that I may need to elaborate upon this, right, after I've given it more thought. But here we're dealing with primary waymarks.
Okay.
Here we're dealing with primary waymarks. What are the primary waymarks in Millerite history? Are these not the primary waymarks of Millerite history?
Sure.
Is 1850 a primary waymark?
I don't know that it's a primary waymark, but it's just.
So why not?
It's a waymark.
It's talked about, you know, same as 1840. You know, I always thought 1840 was a pretty prime waymark, but
You're guided by the characteristics of the parent model.
Yeah.
Right? You're guided by the characteristics of the parent model. So you have second coming. If there's something in here, right, that is showing a scattering then a gathering before the close of probation, then you can add that detail there. But the parent model does not reflect that. What's the next thing the parent model reflects? It reflects the shut door. Do you have something in the history that parallels the shut door? Yes, you do, right? So if the parent model is not reflecting any of those details, then you're not trying to force them in or see them. It means as far as this model is concerned, they're noise. They're not significant. They're not what we're being directed to.
okay, I have another question for you. You're saying that we're looking at the Millerite line primary waymarks. That's your theme of your line that you've drawn?
Yes, based on this model.
Okay. So could you give me an example of another theme using the Millerite time period?
What do you mean another theme?
Please.
Well, I'm just like, they say that every line has to have a
Throughout history.
title or whatever, like the line of slavery or the line of racism or the line of the institutions or the line of the whatever, right? Whatever the theme is. Is there?
You mean the unique lessons being taught by the given line?
Yeah, I guess so. So is there another line within the Millerite time period that you could draw that would be different?
That would look different in what? The waymarks it is presenting?
Sure, yeah. Like if we were looking at a different, so I don't even know if this exists. I'm just gonna throw something out there just to explain myself. Like, so you're looking at the Millerite line and you're looking at something specific about their experience. Maybe it's I don't even know if it's possible. Say that you're looking at how they discovered the Sabbath or something about the line, and then a different time you're looking at the same line, but maybe it's not the exact same waymarks when you're emphasizing a different theme.
Okay.
Or does that happen?
Okay, so this is Millerite history as conceptualized from the macro line of Adventism, right? Another lens through which you could view Millerite history is the parable of the 10 virgins.
Okay, perfect. So could you draw that too, and would it be the exact same?
Similarities, some differences.
So yeah, that's what I would like an example
Okay, so as you look at the parable of the 10 virgins, what are the waymarks that it presents?
of. There's a cry at midnight.
Well, no, so start from the beginning.
They're called.
Right. The 10 virgins, right? There's a call that is given. what does the call correspond with?
Them coming out.
When Illinois speaks about it, what does she reference as the call?
The coming forth of the bridegroom.
Yeah, before the bride come.
No, she refers to the call as the call to prepare for the wedding.
Okay.
Right, she refers to this as the going forth of the widespread message of reform that was proclaimed under Miller. This is 1840, right? And then the call is given, and then the virgins, what do they do?
Trim their lamps. They awoke.
They go out.
Well, they fall asleep.
They fall asleep,
Yeah.
right? So when do they fall asleep? She says April 19. Well, she says after the first disappointment,
Tearing time.
April 1844. Then that marks the beginning of that
Tearing.
time they fall asleep. And while they're sleeping, what's the next development? A cry goes out at midnight. She identifies now the work of Samuel Snow under the midnight cry.
Yeah.
So here you could mark August. The cry at midnight goes forth in August 1844. Then there was a
Shut door.
shut door, October 1844. So you have Millerite history.
Better put the title. 10 Virgin or something like that.
We have Millerite history. 10 virgins.
So yeah, that's where I'm getting messed up. Is that you can do that.
But even with this one on the 10 virgins, you see it's the same history, but it's emphasizing different waymarks. Right?
Okay, so now.
But even here, you're guided by the parent model.
So that being the top one?
No, this year you're guided by this parent model, right?
Yeah.
What is the parent model for this one that we just laid out?
The 10
The 10
virgins.
The parable of the 10 virgins.
So,
So
okay, you'd said it verbally,
Oh.
but so we should have actually drawn it. That
okay,
would've
so
been-
let me erase, then we'll draw it again.
That would be sweet. I'm kind of, jamming things up here. I hope you guys are liking
No,
it,
that's
or
good.
No,
If it's good, if you're happy,
Yeah.
then we'll keep going.
We have
Good.
Okay, so what's the parent model? The parent model is the parable. We begin with the parable and seek to understand the parable and all its specifications, right? And we're not bringing in material from other parables. We stay there with that parable that we're seeking to understand. So here we have 10 virgins. When you read the parable, what are the specifications that it presents?
Maybe we should turn there so we don't mess it up.
What are the specifications presented by the parable? Ray, you've been quiet. I've lost you.
No, you have not. Been listening. What do you mean by specification? Sorry.
What do you mean by specifications? What does that word mean, specifications?
Detail.
Yeah, the details. So we look at the details of the parable. What is it presenting? Matthew 25.
Yeah.
It says, "Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom." So there's a going forth of the virgins. Sorry, what I referred to here is the call is actually going forth. So there's a going forth. Yes?
Yep.
Yes.
We can identify what the virgins are. They represent believers, right? Who respond to the call, right? We identify what the lamps are, right? You can go through all that, but we're just doing it at a high level. It says, and 5 of them were wise and 5 foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. Right, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept.
There's a tarry.
So there is a tarrying time at which they all slumber and sleep.
Then there's a cry at midnight.
Right. Then it says, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh. There is a cry. At midnight. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said unto the wise, give unto us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us, as for us and you. But go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him into the marriage, and the door was shut. So you have a marriage and a shut door. So there are lots of details, yes?
I'm missing one waymark
What am I missing?
Oh.
because you have only 4.
Yeah.
Are you supposed to have 5? Or
Well,
on your template?
you could identify,
Otherwise, it won't go with the Millerite 10 version template.
yes, I know, because this Millerite line does not bring, the 10 virgins does not identify the time at the end.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Right, okay.
So this is your,
Template.
this is 10 virgins, this is your template.
Mhm.
This is your model. This is your parent line. So now when you're seeking, because Ellen White also gives us the guidance that this parable made its fulfillment in Millerite history. So you're given that guidance to look for its fulfillment in Millerite history. And the easy thing with this one is that she explains it. She makes the connection between all these characteristics of the template, the model, with their fulfillment in Millerite history, right? So in Millerite history, they're going forth when the 2 classes of virgins, get up and prepare themselves, right? She says that answers to the widespread reformation that took place under the proclamation of the first angel given by Miller. And we know that widespread proclamation really took off when? 1840. The tarrying time at the first disappointment, that's where she places it, right?
April 19th.
April 19, 1844. And then the cry at midnight. July 1844. Then the shut door tells you October 1844. Now, here with 1798 is just filling in a gap, right? Millerite history begins at the time of the end. So we just fill in that gap. It's not something that's given by the parable, by the parable itself. But we see that even with it's presenting different waymarks of Millerite history than this model here. But we're given guidance by the parent line, right? We're given guidance by the parent line in terms of what waymarks we should be looking at. So the key thing is to understand the template, understand the parent line. That will direct you as to which waymarks in the application, right? But that's more terminology. This is the model, and this is the, we'll call this the application. The parable or the parent line, the template gives you direction as to which waymarks in this history you should be looking at. So a different model, right, can cover this, a different model. The same history can be conceptualized through a different model. Does that make sense?
But it may produce different waymarks.
But it's a different model. This model is teaching different things, right? It's emphasizing different things. So it's going to highlight different waymarks in that same history. Does that make sense?
It makes, yeah. Do you have another one that covers the same time period? I mean,
I get you, Yes?
I think one of the reasons I'm trying to conceptualize why he's struggling with it, and I can understand why he's struggling with it. I think one of the reasons is because we developed the Millerite line based on the parable of the 10 virgins, and we said that's the template, that is the Millerite line.
Yeah.
And we used that as the big macro level line for every other line that we developed, because it has the midnight cry on it, it has, you know, it has the steps of the parable of the 10 virgins, which is the everlasting gospel, the 3-step testing message, and we said that is our macro template. And now what we've done is we've used that template to develop other lines, and we've come up with another line, the big line, and we say we've come up with it. We should have done that to begin with, which we didn't do that one. And now we're saying that's the macro line.
Yeah.
And from that, we've gone back and developed a new Millerite line. So what we've done is we've taken what we said was a template and made a fractal. So, or we started with a fractal and we made a big line. And this, I think this is where the confusion is coming in. So now we're saying that's the macro level one, but that one developed out of the original Millerite line we did, which was based on the parable of the 10 virgins. So we developed that top macro line from the parable of the 10 virgins, Millerite line, which we said was the template. And now we're producing another Millerite line, which we're saying is a fractal.
Are we sure we did that? That we developed this from Millerite history?
Because
That's not how I understood.
well, how did we get that macro line in the beginning? Now we're saying it's from Spirit, Prophecy, and Bible passages, waymarks.
This is just how Great Controversy lays it out. This line.
But
I don't
On
think
one
that's how
level,
it was explained
we never got that to
from the
begin with.
beginning. Like,
no, it wasn't explained like that from the beginning. So the line we originally used to get this didn't look like that. I think that's the problem.
Well,
So the
no,
Millerite line
this
we
is
used was that one up there, which is the Parable of 10 Virgins line. And that was the line we used as a template for every other line. So
Yes.
we basically made that the macro line.
that's the one. That's something that Parminder was correcting. You know that.
Yes, and the issue was we never took it to Second Coming. And we
Yes,
didn't really
that
complete the line properly,
we did not begin with this line.
which we should have done.
That's what he was correcting.
yeah,
That what we should have done is we should have begun with this line just as Spirit of Prophecy lays it out.
yeah.
Then
How
use
confusing.
this as the model.
Yeah.
Right? And then understood Millerite history, you know, through this model. But the way the message developed with Jeff was, you know, he identified Millerite history as a model and not viewing it as a model itself that is governed by a larger line, which is laid out plainly in the Spirit of Prophecy.
And added to that confusion was the fact that we conflated, or we put Sunday law with close of probation. So we have this struggle now because we had put the close of probation for the church as Sunday law, which lines up with the end of the line, you know, October 22nd and the cross. And so then we were struggling to know how to put that line, you know, properly. Now we're separating Sunday law and close of probation, which is what we should have done to begin with. So all that, people that have been in the movement a long time are struggling with this because they've learned different macro line. And we've got to unlearn some stuff.
Yeah, because before Millerite history was, we said that's essentially the model, it's the
macro.
template.
Yeah.
But it really is an application itself.
It's really a fractal.
It's a fractal really,
Okay.
right? And now we've added this additional step that we have to begin with the model as presented in inspiration. Then that governs or directs us in how we conceptualize the fractals, how we break the fractals. And that's what we've done here. That's why, as you said to people who've been here a while, this can look odd, but it fits.
It does.
So I would really appreciate if we could do it again, like, because you've used the ones that are very, you know, make a lot of sense. Like, is there another one that's a little more that we wouldn't be used to, or like, or that, you know, I don't know. I mean, this is very valuable for me. I don't know about everyone else, but
No, I get you. Can we think of what's another?
like that would cover the Millerite time, that would maybe force us to pull a different waymark or whatever. You know what I mean?
I get you. I'd have to think about it. I guess. Does anyone have any suggestions? What's another model we could look at that may frame Millerite history maybe in a different way from these two models that we've presented?
Like a model that describes Millerite history out of the Bible, like what can you think of in the Spirit of Prophecy that she likens the Millerite line to, or a Bible verse that's really connected with it? You know what I mean?
Well, originally, isn't like when we're learning about this kind of back, it's still kind of new, but you have the marriage model, you have the construction model, and you have the agriculture model, and you have geography model. So is there any of those models that we can look at through Millerite history, or that's a different thing?
Of course, there's the model of agriculture.
Maybe. So would that give us any different waymarks than
Because
what we got now?
The 10 version is the marriage model, right? Isn't that the marriage model?
Yes, 10 versions. This is the marriage model.
Yeah.
Right. Well, conception of Millerite history through the model of marriage. Now, the agricultural model, I wanted to come to that later because, you know, there's some issues I think that need to be discussed in connection with the agricultural model and the parable of the wheat and tares, the parable of Matthew 13, and whether we can fractalize when we can fractalize and when we can't fractalize. Right. That's another line of thought that we need to unpack.
So that'll accomplish what I'm asking, right?
I'm trying to see how I can dovetail it.
Well, we don't have to do it right this minute, but if we could try it at some point.
Sure. Okay.
Over the next week.
All right. So we'll work on that. We'll come back with more examples. I know that the agricultural model greatly serves this purpose, but I want to make some points about it, which I'm thinking about myself. Right. So I want to hold back using it as an example right away until we come to that point, if that's okay. But so far, yes.
Oh, that's right. I was just going to make the point about the macro line that we have there. We know that after Sunday law, or at Sunday law, there's a loud cry before the close of probation. So if we mark the loud cry in there, that would line up with August, would it, in that model?
It would.
So we could see August 1844 represented there from the loud cry in the big line.
Yes.
And then we have 1840 in the big line as well. So we could put it down there between 1798 and 1844 if we wanted to.
Well, can I say something? Well, we know that there's those are bookends, right? 1798 and 1884 is a bookend, and then you have 1884 through Sunday law, those are bookends. So you have two waymarks in between those lines, right? We know. Is that making sense? So those can cover those histories, but the main waymarks that we're looking at are those that other tableau has, like right there in that model, right? That
With,
could,
with that macro line, do we put two waymarks in between each one of the bigger line there?
Not with the macro.
Yeah, not, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we do, because I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
we work to go back to the middle right line, because I don't think we've got anything between
Okay.
July and October except August. But August works,
Oh,
and I think 1840 works.
so is that only in our line when,
I think so.
we're,
yeah.
oh, okay, oh, that's only in our line,
But that's what you're saying, sorry. Yeah, I think that's only now that we do that with the two waymarks in between.
okay.
We don't get that from this sort of macro level template.
Although we do, well,
Oh,
yeah, close information, we have density and the time given. What do we do? So
I thought we did get that from,
Outcry and
cause then I thought that was connecting to the Boston, Concord and Exeter, and that is from the Millwright history. But that's probably different, sorry, I don't wanna add confusion.
but you're talking about what?
oh yeah, we
template?
do, actually, we do.
Yeah,
We have
yeah,
July.
the
Oh, the
Boston
Boston
and Exeter, and that's how you
For the
can,
macro line,
In the middle right now, we do have 2 weeks, we have August 1st and August 15th now, that we can put in there.
what two waymarks are we identifying here?
Can't remember, I know the second one is death decree and time, isn't it?
Yeah, here there's
there.
green time. I've never seen anything here.
I think we have put 2 in there, I think we've put, that's what gives us, isn't that what gives us 1989 and 9/11 in that section?
No, this is, because this macro line is just spirit of prophecy as it lays it out.
But it's very obviously talks about death decree and the time being given.
Yes, spirit of prophecy talks about death, decree, and time, okay, here.
Yeah.
But what two waymarks would you put here? There's no visibility of
So
this.
it's just the 144,000 line that we get now. But the 144,000 line is the same as almost, it's those 2 waymarks, isn't it?
The what?
The one you
So
put for-
where do we put the 2 waymarks in each section, and which line is that? It's the 144,000 line, isn't it?
Yes, that's all in application.
yeah.
That's all in application. We don't have a sort of spirit of prophecy model from which we derive, that structure. Test constructs it essentially,
In the Boston Congo Exeter
drawing from Millerite history and the line of the 144,000.
together.
And together. And then she constructs that model based on those 2 lines. It's not based on a sort of line of progression that we can draw from the text of the Bible or the spirit of prophecy.
And it's the 144,000 line where we put those 2 waymarks, isn't it, in each section?
Yes, it's 144,000. You see it in Millerite history, 1798 to 1840, right? And you see it in Millerite history between April 19 and October 22nd. There's July 21st and August 15th, right? So you have those 2 witnesses from Millerite history. Then you have the line of the 144,000 where you see it time of the end, 1989 to 9/11. You also see it close of probation to death decree. So based on the witness of these 2 models, right, which both inform our line, right, based on these two models, it's then deduced that there are enough witnesses, there are at least 3 witnesses in the structure of these 2 lines for us to deduct that we can identify this pattern in every dispensation. So that's how she constructed that's it.
Okay, is the top line on the board, that's 144,000, isn't it?
Yes, this is 144,000.
So what do we say the 2 waymarks are between Sunday law and close of probation? That cries one of them, I can't believe it. Right.
There's the increase of knowledge and the formalization.
Yeah.
That's the pattern that she was
Yeah.
identifying. It's identifying a message unsealed, increase of knowledge, formalization, test.
So at the moment,
Right.
we don't know what that is after Sunday law, do we?
No.
No, okay, so that's okay. So
We have the loud cry though.
Mhm.
It's one
Yes.
of them.
Yes, is the loud cry is the formalization.
Mhm.
That's how I understand. Loud cry is the formalized message.
Okay.
and then the cry goes forth, test and shut door.
Mhm.
That's the pattern, the repeating pattern that we see. But anyway, that's how she constructed that model. She constructed it based on applications, right? But we're kind of starting from the ground up regarding, fractals as a starting point. We need to begin with a macro level line. And I guess the point that's being made is that we tend to make mistakes when we're not guided by a line of whatever one calls a parent line, a line of progression, the literal or the natural, as the Spirit Prophecy lays it out, in order to guide us in the framing of our applications, which are the fractals.
So you've given 2 for the Millerite line,
Yes.
and there's 3. We know, like you said, the agriculture model or whatever. So now is there more different ones for our line? 1989 to the second coming.
Well, yes. I mean, the 10 virgins applies to our line.
So would it
The agricultural model applies to our line. There's some parables that we don't commonly work with. They're the common ones, these ones. The parable of the net, for example, is an illustration of the everlasting gospel. We could use that as a template for how to understand.
priests, Levites, and Nethinims, when you fractalize that down off of our line, the line that it's fractalized from is, what's the theme of that line?
Sorry, Peter.
So,
Where we get priest, Levites, and Nethinim.
yes,
So,
the
yes.
parent line that it comes from, or what's the theme of the parent line that we take the priests, Levites, and Nethinims from?
I think it's Ezra 7:9. That was wasn't that the thing?
The thing is the 144,000.
Oh.
That's the line that we use to
To
divide those 3 groups, because it goes from time of the end to
Yeah.
literal second coming.
And that, so we take the line that we get straight from the Spirit of Prophecy, 1798 to the second coming, right?
Mhm.
It's not a fractal, but it's a copy. We put our line in there, right? Like in 1989, 9/11, right? Is there a theme to that line? Like it's copied from that line, but is there a situation where it would be like with the Millerites, where we would have a different theme that we copied from for our line? And if we used that theme, would that stop us from being able to fract out priests, Levites, and Nethinims because it's a different theme? Or would it work? Do you see what I'm asking?
Does someone get that? I think I do, but I'll say this: when we get these 3 groups,
Yeah.
we get them from Ezra 7:9, right? It identifies these 3 groups. How we understand them in combination with 2 Chronicles 29.
Yep.
Right. These are the 2 pieces of scripture that we use to construct this. Line, right? But we see it more easily and more readily in the line of Christ.
Yeah.
Because we know we understand this concept of Alpha and Omega, right? God declares the end from the beginning. When we look at the line of Christ, of course, the line of Christ is the end. It's the end of the Jewish church. It's also the beginning of the Christian church. If one conceptualizes it that way, you have the beginning of the Christian church, and the end of the Christian church is our time period.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look at the line of Christ, it presents three phases. It presents three distinct groups that are gathered. The disciples from 27, right, to 31. The Jews from 31 to AD 34. And the Gentiles from 34 to 70 AD. Right? So the line of Christ becomes a model, a model for how we conceptualize this history. We see it more readily than we do. You know, you have to. It's a study to look at Ezra 7:9 and bring it together with 2 Chronicles 29. If we just take the line of Christ as a pattern and identify the principles that allow us to identify it as a pattern, what are those principles? What are the principles that allow us to look at the line of Christ as a model?
Because the line of Christ is an omega line,
It's an omega line.
and ours is an omega line. So you will find the three groups, but on the alpha, you don't find the three groups.
Yeah.
On the line of success, you can, but not on the line of failure.
Yeah. The line of Christ is the end of the church. It's an omega history. We're also in an omega history. That's one principle that we can bring to bear to justify looking at the line of Christ as a model.
Sure.
And when we look at the line of Christ as a model, it presents us with these three groups.
Okay, here's what I was trying to ask before.
Okay.
We just took the parent line from the Spirit of Prophecy, we applied it to Millerite time. And then we said, we can do it in a different way. We can take it in the 10 virgins and we can apply it to Millerite time.
Okay.
We know that the parable of the 10 virgins is going to be repeated to the very letter in our time.
Yes.
So we should be able to take that parent line and create a line for us, which we've done.
Yes.
And we should be able to take the 10 virgin line and create a line for us.
Yes.
And will it have something different in the line?
Okay, so if we look at the 10 virgins as illustrating our history, does it look different from what we've laid out here?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Let's work through that. Let's work through that.
Because as far as our line goes, I don't know that I've ever seen a different line for us. Has anyone else? Has it always been the same
For the Millerites?
for us?
How does the parable of the 10 virgins shake out when we look at it in our line?
Yeah.
When you say our line, I'm looking at the line of 144,000?
I'm not 100%. 1989 to the second coming, I guess. The same line that we worked with already.
Okay.
Right?
Is there a poll?
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh.
Well, as far as 1840 goes, but that's not really but that's just there. We're not following that. We're following the top line. Right?
Well, there is a call out of Adventism, but then I'm gonna get confused because there's so many places that we kind of get that from, because that's Daniel 2.
I mean, the
Well, we can't do
1989
that.
is the fulfillment of Daniel 11 verse 40. We say.
1989 is a fulfillment of Daniel 11 verse 40. Yes.
And so that's our time of the end.
Yes.
But like you said before, from the virgin line, we just added that there because all the other information already fit. So
You said what?
well, like you said, the 10 virgin line, all those other 4 waymarks are there, and we, by deduction, we put 1798 there.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
So we kind of just did it backwards.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Well,
right? Because the time of the end isn't in the parable.
Yes,
defense
it's not
version.
there, yeah.
So what I said doesn't count for now, but
Okay,
we can put it in at the
But
end.
oh, go ahead, Suzanne. I was just gonna say, isn't that the same for 9/11 though? Because it's not, that's something that wasn't given to us either.
Well, 9/11 is supposedly the same thing, right? It's when the message got a wider proclamation, right? That was the wide proclamation of the message. That's why we chose 1840, right? In that line.
yes,
So 9/11 would be the same for us.
I have some thoughts, but I want to get to people's hands before I come to Brian.
No, I haven't got it.
I don't know,
Maybe I was just worrying because I know we did this in Africa and need to go back over it in Kenya when we did this. How do we look at this parable of 10 virgins? We don't fully understand it, all the details in it. Maybe we can make some application that we haven't done. Because, for instance, we're seeing a tarrying time in 1844 when he goes in and we see Satan breathing on the people and she says they're tarrying there. Anyway, so I think there's more to this parable than we understand. I'm just wondering if that first sentence we can actually put they take their lamps in 1989 and 1798, because it says the virgins took their lamps and went forth. So there's two thoughts there. I was wondering if we can apply it. I don't know how to link it, but it seems like there's two thoughts. They take the lamps and then they go forward. So I was wondering if, because knowledge is increased there, it's unsealed, which is light given, whether we can say they took the lamps in 1798.
I mean, there could be.
Possibly. That's just a thought, but anyway, carry on. Where are you going with that?
Now, when we look at the parable of the 10 virgins as applied to our line, you know, there are a number of things that we do. I want to think about this a little bit. I won't lay out my thoughts now because I have yeah, there are a number of things that we do. But that, and I wonder if it's when we speak of the combining of the first and second angels' messages, that is something that we bring to bear upon our line, but it is not something that is explicitly brought forth by the parable. So if we're going to look at our history strictly from the perspective of the parable, what does that look like? If we look at our history strictly from the perspective of the parable, in the parable you have a shut door. What is the shut door?
At Panium? Well, sorry. Are you?
Aren't you asking for the line 144,000?
Yeah, he did say
Yeah.
Yeah. So when is the shut door in the line 144,000?
COP.
COP. So there's a cry at midnight. You know, the message goes forth with a loud cry. When does that happen?
Well, that's the thing where it gets weird between priests and 144,000, right?
No, but we're starting with 144,000.
So after the Sunday law was the loud cry.
Right, so loud cry. Okay. So the tarrying time, what would we have that corresponds with that?
Well, that's where it gets kind of, I don't know.
Right, because I understand that before this way we identify that the first and second angels' messages are combined in our line at 9/11. So we would bring 1840 and April 19, 1844 together, right? That's what we used to do.
And then so, but I mean, you could be saved by the bell here too, with 5 minutes left. So I'm just telling you that if you want, if you want to think about some of this stuff. But I'm just saying, would that now not be breaking our model?
Not necessarily, because sometimes there are nuances. Sometimes there are differences in details, right? But I do want to go back and think about this a little further, because, yeah, I do want to go back and think about this a little further. But sometimes there are differences in what it looks like at the end of the world.
Yeah.
And this has been cited as an example of that, because you have the anyway, yeah, maybe not say too much of that. We'll look at this some more. Let me wrap up how far we've come, and then we will continue tomorrow. So we've been we didn't move into my notes. I was trying to see what I leave off in my notes. I realized we didn't go through.
I've been blessed anyway.
Yeah.
So we laid out the idea of, that we must be governed by, we must look for a macro level line. And these macro level lines or lines of progression are usually laid forth in inspiration, the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. And these macro level lines, parent models, lines of progression, they form templates for the fractals that we later identified, right? So we showed how this line of Adventism gives us a template for Millerite history. And it's been pointed out that, if you allow we are to be governed, right? In terms of how we conceptualize our application, we're to be governed by the characteristics presented in the parent model. And we're not to go outside to other models, bring in thoughts and concepts that are not strictly presented in the parent model. We're to identify what this model is teaching, and then identify its implications and its deductions for our model without bringing outside input from other models, right? So we emphasize that. So we even saw that for those of us who've been around for a while, allowing this line to govern how we conceptualize Millerite history, it can look odd, but you can justify it waymark by waymark, that the characteristics the characteristics of the parent model, that the characteristics of the application, each waymark in the application corresponds with the characteristics presented in the corresponding waymark in the parent line, right? And then you raise the question of, how is it that we pick which waymark to line it up with? And I think I just answered that, right? And we identified that different parables can allow us to conceptualize the same history in different ways, emphasizing different waymarks, because each parable is teaching a different thing, right? So it's going to highlight different aspects of the same history that you're looking at. The example we gave was, right, we have the line of Adventism. The 10 virgins is a parable that gives a template through which Millerite history is to be understood, and it brings out and emphasizes different waymarks from this that we have laid out over here. So Trevor's question is, can we draw up more examples of where we do this, where another model other than the 10 virgins or the line of Adventism that we can use as a model to conceptualize Millerite history, maybe even a little differently from these two that we've done. So we need to go back and look at them. And you're also asking about, what does the parable of the 10 virgins look like as fulfilled in our line? And I guess before we've had full-gone conclusions about what this looks like. And I have some thoughts that I'm considering. That being said, I want to go back and look at this, because with our line, at least as I decided, it's not that simple. And we do see that sometimes nuances and differences when we make application to our line at the end of the world. But we want to try to be able to explain all these things, right, as far as possible. Right, I think that's as far as we got. And yeah, we're out of time. Tomorrow we continue. Let's close it. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you, Lord, for this wrestling that we've engaged in, and wrestling with divine concepts. And Lord, we ask, Lord, that you may guide us into all truth. Help us to come away with a greater knowledge and greater confidence in the truth of your word, and better understanding as to how it operates, how it works. Lord, we thank you for bringing us safely through this second day of meetings. May you grant us all a good night's rest. May you grant Terry traveling mercies as she makes her way here. And Lord, we ask for your superintending over the rest of the course of this school. Please hear us in all these things, for we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
I think what we've done with that parable of 10 virgins is we've done it the wrong way around. No, I don't think we need to do it the parable.